What's up, everybody? Just locking and loaded on the Twitter sphere. Let me turn that off. Well, welcome back. Welcome back. A little bit of a break. Last time we did this was in the fall swing, and now we're here at Kapalua for the Tournament of Champions. Happy to be back. Happy to be talking DFS. Actually, that's something if you know or if you don't know, that's something I really enjoy doing. I've found some success, but also really enjoy helping spread any sort of knowledge or whatever that help grow your own DFS game where you're seeing consistent profits because that's the goal. DFS is fun. It can be for entertainment, but it could also be for profit. Very different though, however, than handicapping. One thing, Jers is I love Jers for a lot of ways. One, like we got to appreciate his hustle. Jers is going to the moon. What he is doing, BK Brian's on the show that the night before this, just doing great things. But on top of that, he's a great handicapper. But he also wants the people that he's kind of helping out and that are lined up with him to win money too, to profit. That's what it's about. It's about getting money so we can do what we want to do with it. Achieve goals, buy houses, do whatever. So I really appreciate him for that. But he's also a great golf handicapper. DFS is a little bit different than just straight up golf handicapping. Betting, outrights, top 20s, matchups, whatever. There's a whole different process that goes into it, and we're going to dive in on what that process is. But I first want to talk about luck because a lot of people think DFS is solely based on luck. And what's wild is if you're losing a lot, yeah, you're going to complain that DFS is about luck. That's something that I'm saying people that lose often say, whether you're playing ball or something and you just beat some scrubs and like, oh, that was luck, or you're doing something online, playing something, and you win the other team, or other people say that's luck. Same thing in DFS. It's yeah, we can consistently have bad luck, or we can create bad luck for us if we're not good or we don't know what we're doing. But first, you got to figure out what are we using DFS for. If it's for entertainment, and you just throw a couple bucks or a couple entries in the Millionaire Maker and the majors, and you're just gonna have something to root for. Yeah, that's fun, and you go ahead and do that. I'm not gonna hate on you or talk you down. But if you're trying to actually make money, well, then this is it. This is what we kind of want to do. This is how we want to talk about it and focus, and that's why, gosh, I'm here tonight, and why Jers is here, and why so many great others in this industry are here to help because we want to. There's money to be made, and right now, or I guess I should say, in the last 5 to 10, or maybe in 15 years, the majority of the money has been won by 1%. These whales that know exactly what we're doing, or they're doing, excuse me, and the majority don't. Majority thinks, like for golf, for example, that it's just a handicapping contest. But anyway, if you're competitive, I like to think I'm competitive. I know Jers is an athlete. He's competitive, I would assume. If you're competitive, DFS should be your game, or you likely would be very good at it. Because DFS, we're not just competing against a house or a book or something like that. We're competing against tons of other people. We're competing against thousands upon hundreds of thousands of entries depending on our contest. So if you're competitive, let's use that competitive advantage to figure out how do I beat these other, MFers that I'm playing in the contest with. So often we make lineups based on one fear, but also thinking that I just have to beat DraftKings. Which, if we're doing kind of 50-50, it is kind of like that because we're just simplifying the tournament. We just have to beat half the field, or we're doing triple up, double ups. That we can kind of rely more on handicapping. But so many people make lineups that actually gives them the bad luck. What actually gives you luck, and week to week in DFS, just like any sort of gambling or investing, there is a little luck, especially if you look at it week by week. But if you draw it out over a longer timeline, let's say a year, your abilities and how I'm a big fan of it. If you use game theory, for example, or any other type of method, you're actually making yourself lucky. And then you have a higher chance to win. You're making yourself, so many golfers, or so many, I should say, DFS players are playing golf DFS they're not bad luck. They're just bad because they're making lineups on a completely different way. For example, one way people do it, and I was just reiterating it, is that people make lineups like they're they're handicapping. It's like this guy's the best opportunity to win in the 6K range, this guy's the 7K range. That it doesn't matter at all. So when we're thinking about making lineups, the goal in every DFS GPP contest is to try to take it down, try to get in first place because of how the prize money is structured. You can see it that the first place in the Millionaire Maker, and don't quote me on this, but is $1 million, and second place is like 100 grand. So there's a huge drop off there. So you're not going to make any sort of profit long term if you're min cashing, finishing. Let's just say there's 100 people in a contest. If you're finishing 20th or even 15th or even 10th, really, you need to be near the 1%. You need to be at the 0.1%. You need to be up near top 1, 2, or 3, preferably 1. And how do you get that? Is building lineups that beat these other fools in our contest, and that's using by contrarian, finding leverage. And just because we mentioned contrarian and in managing things like ownership and being mindful of that, we're not saying that you should just go out and roster 6 guys that say, hey, all these guys are low owned and all these guys are sleepers. Not saying that. This is where we want your handicapping to kind of come in and say, okay, the art of making a lineup, or a GPP lineup, I should say, is so crucial. So we want to rely, again, first on your handicapping knowledge, but handicapping only gets you halfway. So you rely on your handicapping knowledge that you should pick. Okay, I'm going to pick, my handicapping says, let's just give you the example for this week that Bryson is number 1. Well, just because Bryson is going to be highly owned, around 25%, I'm not going to X him. I'm not going to put him in my lineups. How can we create leverage over the other individuals in our contest? Well, if he's going to be 25% owned, I'm not going to match the field at him and only own 20% of my own lineups. Or I'm not going to go underweight, because if I really like him and I trust my handicapping, why the hell would I bet against myself with what we're doing if you're going underweight on him? So you go overweight. So I would go, if I'm making 100 lineups, I would go 70% of Bryson. So that's 70 in my lineups to create that leverage. But also in each singular lineup, we want to think, how is this lineup going to be unique? So often we talk about dupe lineups. That is a risk this week. We have 38 golfers. There's going to be a lot of dupe lineups. But what also makes, really kind of cuts people's legs out from under them is not only are lineups duped, but you'll see amazing, it's so unfortunate, but amazing amounts of entries that have similar 3 and 4 and almost 5 golfers. So even though they're not duped, they only have 1 or 2 unique variations of a lineup. So one key thing that people do if they're hand building lineups, they always start top to bottom. Everybody does that. Well, if I'm competitive and I'm trying to beat over these people in these contests, I'm not going to start from top to bottom. I'm going to go bottom to top or start in the middle, because that's naturally already a method right there that's going to give me a little uniqueness, likely. Another way to do it is DraftKings and FanDuel's and all these fantasy sites, pricing is arbitrary. They have their own models that gives the salary, but they can't predict who's going to finish in the PGA tournament, just like we can't predict that. But so many people hold DraftKings pricing, for example, as gospel, like this is that way. So everyone feels like they have to get as close to the 50K allotted salary as they can. Well, that right there, if people are trying to squeeze in salary, well, then we're going to come with more dupe lineups, or we're going to have more lineups with all the 4 same golfers, only 2 golfers unique. So it's just things to consider. And I'm going to dive in on that in a little bit further. But maybe you're here because you want to improve your handicapping. And that's where you might want to reach out to Jerz again, because he's a great handicapper. And so you want to find, if you're here to learn how to handicap, this might not be your show, but you want to find what works. One thing that I really think there is value in DFS for handicapping is finding trends and outliers based on previous norms. So what I mean by that is, if I'm looking through a golfer's recent form, strokes gained wise, and let's just say over their last 50 rounds, they kind of only gain, let's say, 1 stroke on approach, or maybe this past year, last year they gained 1 stroke on approach. But their last tournaments, or let's say last 5 tournaments, that number on approach is trending upwards, where they're going above their means, they're above their norm. well, we might get a ceiling opportunity for that golfer. And so that's an opportunity where, yeah, we really want to rely on our handicapping. But in DFS, handicapping again only gets you halfway. We got to use that competitive nature. We got to think, okay, how can I build something unique combined with my handicapping skills with the possibility of upside? So speaking of upside, one thing that caps our upside is what I mentioned earlier is that we try to build lineups on what can go wrong. So many people, and especially there's a big theme on it right now that says your first goal in building lineups is to get 6 of 6 through the cut line. And so you have to build a lineup that you think can get 6 of 6. And that's like kind of right. You definitely need 6 of 6 to win a GPP in a full field event. But if you're making a lineup that says, okay, I just have to find golfers that can make the cut. Well, then you're not competing against other entries in the GPP contest. You're competing against the cut. And so then you're also going to lose out because you're looking at guys who are going to be low owned, and they're low owned for a reason. Maybe they haven't performed well. And so you look at that guy and you think, I can't roster him. He's missed 6 cuts in a row. So we're thinking right there, okay, what can go wrong? Instead of what can go right. What can go right allows us to reach higher ceilings. And that's what we want in DFS is reach the ceiling of the GPP win. So yeah, you're likely you might have 6 weeks in a row where if you have 100 lineups, they all might be 5 of 6, 4 of 6 or less. But if you trust the handicapping skills and if you can identify leverage based on ownerships and you're not fear based, well, then maybe that 7th week, 70% of your lineups get 6 of 6 when there's chaos and a bunch of chalk missed the cuts, and then where there's less than 1% of the field is 6 of 6, but you have 70% in your own lineups. And weeks like that is where your advantage really, really shines. And you have, like, if it's the Millie Maker, a higher chance to win the Millie Maker than so many other in your contest, and it's the odds and the math of it is just astounding. That's the weeks we kind of capitalize for it, and that's what you're playing. Yeah, it sucks maybe to lose 6 weeks in a row. That's the nature of DFS, GPPs, I should say. If you want something more consistent, well, gosh, well then do your handicapping, do your outrights, top 20s, whatever, your cash games. But there's money to be made in DFS. DFS was, a lot simpler maybe 10 to 15 years ago because you could rely, there wasn't these modelings and the data at our fingertips like it is now. So you could rely on your own handicapping just naturally to produce unique lineups. But now everyone's handicapping ability is so similar because there's so much information out there. That's why you go on Twitter and so many people have similar outrights. Maybe there's only one. If people are posting a card of 5 golfers, there's a core that is just circulating out there. There's a lot of groupthink that gets out there. So you can just see how people are starting to think similar because we're all getting the same data. And you can only interpret it differently in a number of ways. So that actually made DFS tougher. So what we really have to rely on right now is the game theory aspect. And if you're competitive, you actually will thrive in game theory. And it's funny because game theory, it's a theory, not even intended to use in sports or gambling. And it's poker has been brought up a lot in that, but golfers use it without knowing it. If you think in a golf tournament, and you hear all these golfers say they don't like the leaderboard watch, but if they said, okay, if they weren't using game theory, and they may not even know they're using it, then they're just going out and playing golf and playing against themselves. And if they're playing against themselves, like, okay, I'm not even worried. I'm not even thinking about, what number I have to shoot. Or if they're not even worried about what place they're in. So if you go into a Sunday round and you're 5 back, you have to be aggressive to beat your competitors. That's just game theory simply right there in a way, in a small way. Or I should say one type of it. There are multiple types of what game theory really is, but we're not here for that. The key thing is we want you to teach you how to fish. So many touts out there, and I can be guilty of it, is we want to provide you picks, but what's more valuable is teaching you how to fish, not providing you the fish so you can kind of do this on your own. So Matt Jerz has a great question right now. going to start playing 3-entry max. How important is ownership being overweight in pools like that? Very important. I actually love to get more contrarian in the single entries and the 3-entry max, because what do people tend to do? They tend to build more conservative lineups, and when you can only enter 3 lineups or like a single entry. So if I have like Bryson, gave that example, I'll be extremely overweight. If he's going to be 25% owned, I don't want to put him in just one of my lineups where that means I only have like 33.3% of Bryson. I want to get massive leverage on the field. So I would have him on 100% of my lineups. If I just build 3, he'd be in all of them. And I might actually pick 1 or 2 other golfers that would be 100. Like I'd own them in all 3 of those lineups, and then kind of have 1 or 2 golfers that I rotate in the other 3. So you have maybe 3 golfers that are locked in 100%. Then you might have 3 golfers that are somewhere between 33 to, I think, what's the other, like 66% within there, and then a couple that are just 5%. I'm not doing the math right, but hopefully you kind of get it. And that's scary because when your core doesn't go well, you've lost by Friday afternoon. But the more often you build that tight core like that, you'll have a higher opportunity to win the GPP. And again, we're not trying to cash, so you have to stomach, like all of us will have to stomach losing more than we win. But when we lose small, but we win, the opportunity to win big is right there, and that's the name of the game at GPPs. It's like, how do we get to the top prize? Speaking of how the DraftKings pricing is arbitrary, what you really want to do, and I would really recommend it, is rank your own players like 1 through 50 in a tour event before DraftKings pricing comes out. So that means your own. If you believe you're a good handicapper and you can find discrepancies versus, let's say, gosh, I ranked this guy 10th and DraftKings has him in the 6Ks, extreme value there. And Matt, you might want to chime in. I know you do a great job of making your own lines for college basketball, college football too. And then I'm assuming you make your bets based on the biggest discrepancy. Like if you had, like last time, a Cats fan and Xavier Wheeler got hurt and we almost won that game, and I'm kind of hurt about it still. But let's just say you had UK -5, and let's say you had UK -5. That was what you projected, but Vegas had LSU -1. You might say, gosh, well, Kentucky's the bet there because look at that discrepancy. The same thing goes. We want to build almost our own lines of golfers and find out the discrepancy with DraftKings, because DraftKings pricing is just arbitrary. So just kind of things to consider. I want to share my screen because I want to show you ownership projections and kind of go into a little bit of what we're doing this week. Let's see. All right. So hopefully you can see it. Let's see if you can. Yeah, you got it right here. So we have the ownership projections right here. I think this is the most updated, and it might be updated one more later this evening. But we see John Rahm, we see Colin, both around 22%. JT, one of the highest, 28%. Bryson coming down. I'm so happy to see that. So let's just pretend that we're building a lineup. So everyone starts up top. And here's what I'll just give an example of what I think everyone is doing this week. And I'm actually going to pull up my DraftKings just so I can get the math right, that we're actually building a lineup with the correct allotted salary. So bear with me real quick. And please, this is intended to be helpful. At least I hope it's helpful. So you have questions, please send them in the chat. So here we go. So here's what I think most of the people are doing, and we'll look at the projected ownership to see. People are going to, it looks like the average person's first click is going to be JT, and then they kind of roll down, and then maybe they pick Xander. So that already is leaving 7,400 left on the table. So you're like, all right, let's go down to 7,400 range. You know what? I really like Cam Smith. Let's put him in there. So we got Cam Smith, that leaves 7,200. So it's like, all right, 7,200. Let me go down here. Well, gosh, Taylor Gooch is playing well. And so you see how I'm like thinking, how I think the average Joe is going to think. And that's going to leave us 7K with 2 golfers left. The average remaining salary is 7K. So you're like, okay, I might need a sleeper here? Who's a good safe sleeper? We're like Seamus Power. I'm gonna say Max Homa. That's a lot of people like Max Homa, so I'm gonna go, and build that one right there. And what do I have? I have 7,300 left. They say that's perfect. So we scroll right up to 7,300 mark because we think DraftKings pricing means value. The more closer I can get to 550K, that means value. Well, no, again, it's arbitrary. And they go, you know what? Billy Horschel had a great fall campaign, played well over in England. I'm going to pick him. And you think that lineup is something that you just created, and that's using your, knowledge. Maybe you watch a lot of golf. And you're like, gosh, I did that pretty good. And for a cash game, yeah. But you just made such a basic lineup just by going through and starting top to bottom like that and just filling in. If you're kind of picking golfers as just fillers, you're not kind of striving for the GPP win. So that's why you got to mark it out and make your own list of the golfers before DraftKings prices up, so you're not manipulated and swayed by DraftKings pricing. Oh, Jerz is talking about UK. Yeah. You made UK -3, then grabbing at +4. Gosh, that was so sick. First, they shouldn't even been in the game when Wheeler went down, but then that final possession, I was hurt about that. I'm not gonna lie, I was really hurt about that. But let's come back to this. So one thing to point out, and I really love it about fan share, is you can kind of see recency bias. And even though I guess I can't use that example this week because nobody played last week, but there's a tab that you can look at that says, okay, this person was chalk last week and maybe they had a bad performance and now they're barely owned this week. And that's an example of finding a big game theory tool, which is recency bias. Can we capitalize on groupthink or people, being where their emotions are getting the best of them? So if I rostered, let's pick a golfer who this might work. Yeah, let's just say Sung J M is going to be very popular, maybe the chalkiest guy this week, close to 30%. Let's say, and if he plays next week, let's say that we all roster Sung J M at 30% and he finishes last this week. Well, then we're like, gosh, I can't roster Sung J. I just lost all this money. And so next week at the Sony, we're like, no, I'm not going to roster him. And so we're letting our recency bias, that bias, affect our strategy in DFS. It's getting off our strategy. We're not getting knocked off the horse of that. So maybe if I'm in the future next week and I see this recency bias, I can say, oh my God. And so it's last tournament. That's what that means. So don't look at it right now because we haven't played in a while. But I can just capitalize that from a game theory perspective and says, gosh, Sung Jae was 30% last week and now he's 10% in a weaker field. Like, let's capitalize on that because we're capitalized on a flawed human element, which is bias. That's what we really want to do within game theory, is capitalize on those variables. So I just want to go through and talk about maybe some of these fillers before I kind of let you go. The biggest filler, Cameron Davis, I actually really like him, but if he can stay under 11, all these guys are kind of okay. The worst ones right now are Max and Seamus. Max, I think, is a great bet. He's a great top 20, great top 10, but DFS, I don't see how you can roster these guys. So many golfers haven't played. There's a few that played in the Hero, but so many golfers haven't played in so while. We have no current form to come in here. So what's the upside of rostering a golfer based on the unknown of what form they're in? Like, there's nothing. There's no upside this. We have no idea how they're hitting the ball. We haven't seen, I would say Seamus. We haven't seen Seamus in a couple months before Thanksgiving. How do we know how he's coming in? And there's such a thin line with golfers, so many variables there where golfers can play great and still miss the cut. That happens sometimes. Can play great and still, not finish top 20. So the margins are so thin. And so why are we rostering a high, maybe if your handicapping strategy, which I don't know what it might be because we just don't have data this week, but if your handicapping strategy says, yeah, Seamus Power, you got to play him, well, then go overweight. But if it's a filler, if you're filling in the last piece of your lineups with a guy like Homa or Power in DFS, it doesn't make any sense because what are you gaining? We have zero clarity on how well they're going to play, how well they're coming in. What I like to say is we don't know what kind of golfer they are right now. One thing that really helps us is data. Data illuminates the golfer that the type of golfers these golfers are here now in the moment. We just don't have any data, so it's all a guess. So instead of just guessing to give yourself bad luck, which is what we're doing if we roster those guys, let's go the game theory route and say, I'm going to take advantage of people navigating to these two golfers and go to a Siwoo or go to a Phil, who I really like. I like Phil. Phil's a great play here. So I'm going to finish up real quick. Taylor Gooch, I do want to talk about him. 20% is right on the fence. If it stays like that, I might go heavy on Taylor Gooch. To see if there's any other golfers. I know it's hard to really throw out, who do I really like this week, just from a golfing perspective, because we don't have any data. But what I really am looking at, Mike, and I say all the time, the ownership projection should be just as important as your salary. To me, like this week, that is the salary. So I'm finding value in a guy like Brooks. Brooks is the biggest value out here. Yeah, hasn't played well, was hurt last year. There's a lot surrounding him. This is, we get Brooks off the layoff. We don't know what he's been doing the offseason. He smoked Bryson in the match. But a guy at 8,500, the caliber of him, the same thing with Hideki. I will go out on a limb and say the winning lineup has either, in a GPP, has Hideki or Brooks in it. And so if I firmly believe that, then I'm going to have a lot of Hideki and Brooks, which I do in my lineups. I will really believe that the winning lineup of GP has Hideki or Brooks at it. And you're getting Hideki at 12%, a Masters champion at 12%. Why? Because current form? What current form? It does not make any sense. From, maybe you're looking at the course history. The sample size is too small. Even if you played here 5 times, sample size is too small. And too much of a variable or less of a variable to make any sort of considerations that you should have. So this is kind of how you should be thinking within DFS. I hope it's helpful. I'm looking forward to doing this each Wednesday, and as we get going, and as we get fuller fields, then it becomes more fun. And as we get more data, then that becomes more fun. So I'm really looking forward to this and really appreciate Jerz, Matt, appreciate you for letting me do this. And hopefully this is a little bit helpful, or a little bit maybe just a reminder, so we can kind of cash tickets. We can finish on the top of the leaderboard and the GPPs. And if you do, I love seeing. I'm a big screenshot guy. I love seeing screenshots. So if you have a good week in your GPPs, tag me and tag Matt, tag Jerz. Let's celebrate together. Does that sound good? Well, all right, guys. Well, I appreciate you listening wherever you are out in the world. Love the life you live. Love the life tomorrow that you're going to live. And I love you all. Take care and be well.